we have, to the extent the time permitted, we have had questions and very nice and comprehensive answers by Mr. Jha. And now we move on to our next speaker, Mr. Payam Shoghi. May I request you, sir, to make your presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I wish to thank the chairman of the session, Mr. Garg, for allowing me to extend my presentation for a little bit. I was struggling to fit in everything, so he's been most kind to allow me to bore you a little bit more. Also, there's a disadvantage of being the last speaker of the day, because everything that had to be said has already been said. So I'm wondering, how am I going to make this presentation, because I'm going to repeat a lot of things that have been said. But also here's an opportunity of tying in everything together and presenting it in a manner that probably you can find it easier to carry with you. Now I have a good news and a bad news. So I'll give you the good news first. For all those who are interested, but first let me also mention that like everybody else, I'm going to use these terms of character education, value education, moral education, and all interchangeably. Now all of these mean different things, but we don't want to get into that. We know what we're talking about. So for all those who are interested in the topic of character education and value education, which essentially is this group, there is good news. The good news is this, that people have found out that by using certain substances, you can alter behavior. They actually noticed this with a horrible thing called alcohol. But it all came to light when they started experimenting with antidepressant drugs. And they saw that people who consume these medicines, antidepressants and so on, they actually become more helpful, they become more kind, they become more patient, which otherwise they were not. So there are a whole lot of people who are experimenting with the physiological aspect of behavioral change. And they're coming up with something called the morality pill. And this is the good news. That's how you want people to become more truthful, pop in a pill. You want people to become honest, take another pill. You want to become more patient, take another pill. So here's the good news. It makes things much easier for us, educationists. Don't worry about that. Continue doing the other things. Medicine will take care of morality. So that's the good news. But the bad news is that this is not going to happen. It'll never work. The reason is that human endeavor is conditional upon something much greater than a pill, and it's volition, it's will. If we have to act in a manner, we need to know what we have to do. We need to know the consequences of doing or not doing that thing, and then mustering the will and volition of doing it and getting up, going ahead and doing that. So the question is, do we want to be good because we have to, which is the case with a moral pill. You pop in a pill, you'll give up your volition, and you have to act in a manner. Or do we want to? So as educationists, I'm afraid there's no easy way out. We will have to go the long way, the hard way, and we have to kind of influence human volition, that people will want to adopt a certain kind of character, upright character that is meet and seemly. So a little bit of good news and bad news for us. So there is no shortcut here. A few guiding principles. These have been mentioned again and again, so we'll breeze through it. Human nobility. Friends, all of us dealing with schools are dealing with human beings. Little children, teachers, parents. The question is, who are they? When you look at a classroom full of children, 20, 30, 40, 50 and more, what do you see in these children? Are they just bodies sitting on these chairs, benches? Or are they bodies with hearts, minds and souls? Because the nature of our work with these children is going to change depending on how we see them. So this question of human nobility and whatever has been said about human nature is very pertinent. Once and for all, we have to be clear. Who are we as human beings? Nobility, by the way, is something that religion tells us. God says that I've created you in my own image. Now, God will not create something horrible. God will create noble being. Now, it's a different matter that this nobility does not always come out. So we have a problem there which we have to figure out, but we are noble creatures. So that's one guiding principle, and these are very general guiding principles. They have nothing to do with character education. They have nothing to do with education. They're just there. The second principle to realize is that human being is much more than just this body. We have a material part, an intellectual part, a social part, and more importantly, a moral and spiritual part. So all of this needs to be stimulated. All of this needs to be developed. But is that happening? Sadly, no. Today, education, for example, is merely a tool for our material progress. Good job, more money, more wealth, more progress, and so on. A little bit of social progress is happening. A whole lot of intellectual progress is happening because schools are mostly only about academics. What about moral? What about spiritual? We had a press conference earlier. Friends, if it's not going to happen in schools, where else is it going to happen? Schools are the places where we have formalized education. We have put in systems for formal education. Now we have figured out everything else except values and morals and everything else. So what we are doing is faulty, it's incomplete, and it's just as well that we are sitting together and discussing these things. The third, of course, is what Suniti mentioned, and we have been hearing this since morning. It is not enough for me to become a good person, to be transformed and good. What are we going to do with all these wonderful people if we are not going to build wonderful society? I'll give you an example. Many people struggle to understand this concept, the interrelationship between transformed individual as against a transformed society. Friends, a drop of water, a humble drop of water, H2O, has no capacity, nothing. But a whole lot of these drops of water, when they gather together, the dynamics created are nigh uncontrollable. They move boulders, they generate electricity. Look at water, they irrigate vast areas of land. Look at what a river can do. Now, the day we realize that collectively new dynamics come about when people get together, then we begin to see the reality of life and education and the world in a different light. And that's something we need to do. So these are some of the general guiding principles that we need to be aware of. More focused on value education, there are also a few guiding principles. In fact, 3 of them. The first is, of course, value education has to have this affective part, the part that touches the heart. And it's a concept that's easy to understand. You know, we give inspiring stories to children and we touch their tender hearts and we motivate them and all of that, emotions, attitudes, and so on. What is generally missing is the second part, which is the cognitive part. Friends, thinking. Our children, sadly in India, in Indian schools, even among the best schools, are not being trained to become thinkers. Why? We have academics, we have study, we have social studies, a lesson is taught. At the end of the lesson are questions. The answers to these questions are in the lesson. You just pick them up and write them down. Where is the thinking happening? So we are not developing groups and groups of thinkers. And when you bring this in the context of values, we realize that we are not fulfilling the potential that is possible. Let me give you an example. Empathy. What is the meaning of empathy? Empathy means putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. This takes imagination. This takes higher order thinking. I need to imagine myself in the person. If my cognitive skills are not so developed, how am I going to ever know what empathy means? So we need to understand that values and character education cannot happen unless we create bands of thinkers. How is that going to happen? We need to figure it out. The third, of course, is the conative part, which is action, service. And the best example is Neora High School. They gave us some wonderful examples of how we actually can act upon this. Value education requires these 3 things. The affective, where it touches the heart. The cognitive, where it stimulates the mind. And of course, action. So a little bit background. Moving on. What do we mean by whole school? Whole school approach to value education means nothing but reinforcement. Do something again and again and again and again and again till it has the desired effect. That's whole school. Now, this is what I have found in my experience, that this approach works very well. The first is, of course, the direct approach, where you actually have a set of materials, a teacher, dedicated periods, and we are doing that. But it doesn't end there. There is something called the integrated and the whole school, and I'll take you through them summarily. The first is, of course, the direct approach. When you assign a set of material to a designated teacher and fixed periods in the class, it allows you focus and flexibility, which otherwise you will not have. So there is merit in having this. Now suddenly we don't get excited and throw away all these things and say, all right, whole school means we do everything else but this. So this is also a whole school. It's one small part of what should be happening in the school. A lot of focus, a lot of flexibility, and it works very, very well. This is what a direct approach should have. These are some of the things. It should not be didactic. Mrs. Geeta mentioned in the morning that this element of didactic. What does it mean? Didactic means that at the end of the lesson you are giving a moral of the story. Therefore we learn, moral of the story is that we should be kind to animals. You allow the children to discover for themselves. Remember, cognition. So our materials should be non-didactic, they should be inspiring, to touch the heart. The methodology is very important. Many times we are not very careful about the methodology that we employ, in not only values, but everywhere. So and I'll be talking a little bit more about the methodology that we should be using. Teachers, the teachers need to be oriented, they need to be, this is one of the most